Thank you all for joining us today for this British Chamber of Commerce event on Battery Storage for Asia, a Net Zero Accelerator. This event is brought to you by the Energy and Utilities Committee and supported by the Sustainability Committee, sitting as part of the Road to Net Zero campaign. My name is Bree Michel and I'm a member of the Chamber's Energy and Utilities Committee and partner with international law firm Ashurst, based in Sydney. Until recently, I was based in Singapore as partner at another international law firm and have spent much of the past 15 years advising on energy and infrastructure projects in the Asia region. We're delighted to have you with us today for this timely discussion on the role of energy storage and battery storage in particular in supporting the region's transition to sustainable energy sources. We have a brilliant panel for you in what I hope is going to be a very lively discussion, including the opportunity to speak with our industry experts in breakout groups at the close of the Q&A discussion. Throughout the Q&A, I welcome you to submit questions for our panel in the chat. And a very big welcome from the Chamber and myself to our panellists. Our panel has a breadth of expertise in energy storage, as leaders in industry, policy and tech incubation. Firstly, welcome to Siobhan Clark. Siobhan is an operating partner at BP Launchpad, investing in and scaling energy companies. She has past experience in sales and strategy roles in startups and big tech. Her expertise lies in finding the value exchange and getting the right things done. We're also joined by BritCham de Brest, Regional Head of Business Development at Engie. Engie is one of the largest independent power producers in the world and leader in energy efficiency services worldwide. Their core mission is to partner with and assist large corporations, industry, businesses, and local governments in their energy efficiency, energy management, and renewable energy needs by designing and delivering cost-effective and sustainable solutions as a service in accelerating common ambition and journey towards zero carbon emissions. Welcome also to Benny Suryadi. Benny is currently a manager of the Power Generation, Fossil Fuels, Alternative Energy and Energy Storage Department for the ASEAN Centre of Energy. He has over 10 years experience managing and researching and programs related to energy, power and climate change in Southeast Asia, supporting countries in accelerating their energy transition. Benny also manages two ASEAN major projects, the ASEAN Climate Change and Energy Project, known as ACCEPT, the first integrated energy and climate change project in ASEAN, and the ASEAN Interconnection Master Plan Study 3, the regional blueprint for electricity interconnection. Finally, we welcome Mauricio Riveros, a senior manager in energy systems at the Carbon Trust. The Carbon Trust is an independent organisation that advises businesses, government, the public sector and financial institutions on their opportunities in a sustainable low carbon world. Mauricio is an electrical engineer with 15 years of experience in analysis and design of power systems, electricity market regulation, and systemic integration of smart technologies and distributed energy sources. At the Carbon Trust, he's worked in the low carbon energy sector on several projects related to smart grids, renewables and storage for a range of high profile public and private clients, including local governments in the UK, Latin America and Asia. Now kicking off our Q&A session, I think it would be helpful to clarify what it is we mean by energy storage and the different types of battery storage there are. Perhaps, Mauricio, if you could provide us an overview.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. Of course, with very pleasure, I can give you an overview about what we understand by energy storage. Well, first of all, we have to understand that the electricity is produced and consumed at the same time. And this is the big challenge, basically. It has been always the big challenge in the power system. The storage has the opportunity of basically provide flexibility to a power system. And by energy storage, we understand all the process of charging, storage, and discharging the energy in a controlled manner. And this discharge and charging process is done based on external signals, usually prices, but also can be a particular energy signal in terms of depending on what is the type of services that the energy storage is providing. However, there are different types of energy storage, there's different way of actually they can be categorized. Usually, it's done by the type of vector they use for the charging and discharging process. For example, this can be electricity, heat, or can be synthetic fuel, even gas. But also, it can be categorized depending on their characteristics. For example, how long is the charging and discharging duration, which will be related to how big is the size of the storage capacity, and also how quickly how big is the storage output, and therefore the power output of the asset. And if you see the whole value chain, actually there's different possibilities of technologies. For example, at the grid scale, in the transmission grid, you can have big sizes of storage with long duration time of charge and discharge, such as, for example, compressed air technology, pumped hydro storage, or power to gas technology, where, for example, I'm thinking about using electricity to produce, for example, hydrogen, and then using the hydrogen as a storage component. But also in this, at this size, the batteries can also provide a storage capacity. Then if we move down to the distribution system, also there's a different type of technology, such as flow battery, but here actually there's a big component of storage provided by batteries. And among the most common are the lithium-based batteries and the sodium-based batteries. And then if you go to the fast response, which are the type of technology that need to provide a response in the level of seconds to provide stability to the grid. In that case, again, there's different type of technology, such as the supercapacitor, the flywheel. But once again, the batteries can participate in providing services at this level. So as you can see, the different type of technology you can classify in different manners, but batteries are a type of technology that can participate in different places across the whole value chain. However, and this is the last thing I would like to share with you, still the batteries are far behind in terms of how much is the total installed capacity in the world. By far, the most installed capacity is pumped hydro in the range of 95% of the more than 150 gigawatts installed in the world. However, in the next decade, a big component of the 80 gigawatt expected to be installed in the next 10 years probably will be from batteries. So as you can see, battery can have a big opportunity in the next years, and there's different drivers for that.
Thanks very much, Mauricio. And I guess following on from that, with all the varied technologies and sort of, I guess, the very purposes that they serve, what are, if you could give us an overview of what services and opportunities batteries actually do present?
Yes, sure. Well, as I said, the storage can be located across the whole value chain, and particularly batteries in all the different places of the value chain. And as I have said, can be in the transmission, distribution, the generation at the systemic level, but also they can be located behind the meter in the demand side. So basically, we can categorize different type of services depending if they are grid-based batteries providing services directly to the grid, or if they are behind the meter battery installed in the demand side in sites of users, providing services either for the users for their own demand and their own interest, or to provide the grid services to the grid. And then also another possibility is you talk about an off-grid system, so not connected to the interconnected power system. And in this case, also battery has opportunity to provide different type of services. Just to give a flavor, type of services which are very common for batteries. For example, at the system level, so I'm talking about batteries providing services for the system operator. The batteries can provide frequency support, can provide also reserve in terms of short-term operating reserve, or renewable energy support. For example, decreasing the level of curtailment of renewable energy at a particular moment in the overall system. But then in the generation particular aspect, also, for example, for generation asset owner, it can provide frame capacity. For example, if you have a renewable energy asset which has an intermittent generation, such as wind or solar, battery can frame its capacity. or curtail, reduce the need of curtailment due to restriction of the system operator. Then if you go to the grid, different type of services can be also provided by batteries that as a result will create a value for the transmission or distribution system, network owner. And these services will allow basically to defer investment or even avoid needed of investment in case of an increase of demand, and particularly also avoid particular congestion in an area in a grid. And finally, if you go to the demand, as I said, these batteries can provide services for the own purpose and interest of the user, such as, for example, arbitrage on energy and prices, in order to decrease the bill of the users, but also quality of supply if the battery is used to basically increase the quality of the electricity that the user is taking from the grid, or just backup for a particular process. And finally, of course, all those services that I mentioned that could be provided by the system operation or the overall network can be also provided by the user, as I said, behind the meters. And but for that, it's important to have an adequate landscape, a regulatory and policy landscape that allow the users from the demand to participate in providing services to the grid in the form of, for example, ancillary services.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. That was fantastic. Now, just focusing in on Asia. So the region obviously includes countries at very different stages of development, with different operating models for their energy systems, disparate policy objectives and stakeholder interests. We have countries further along the path of a transition to renewables, and we have merchant and state-controlled electricity markets. Turning to you, Benny, grateful if you could provide an overview of electricity markets across the region, their progress in incorporating renewables into the energy mix, and the challenges to continue towards net zero and improve energy access.
Thank you very much, Bri. So I will start with I believe will be a very good news for us in region. Last year, when the world was scrambling with the COVID-19 pandemic, 10 countries in the Southeast Asia region added cumulatively around 22 gigawatt new installed power capacity. So it's making the total now it become around 285 gigawatt. About 82% of this new capacity in 2020 was renewable. So this is a notable new trend. While the installed fossil fuels capacity and renewable capacity were comparable in the last 5 years, the countries in this region are now looking more toward renewable energy. Vietnam solar power greatly expand. Thailand and the Philippines wind power climb. Laos created the new hydro capacity, not only for its domestic use, but also for region, including the recent one to be supplied to Singapore. Looking to the current power development plan of 10 countries in the region, more than 60% of the new installed capacity for the next 4 or 5 years will be coming from renewable, as part of the regional efforts to achieve the target of 35% renewables in the powers by 2025 in the long run to go towards the net zero. This is an exciting development, I believe. However, we also concerned that if a large amount of variable renewable power plants are being built and deployed into the system in the short time frame without enough preparation in the supporting infrastructure, as Maurice mentioned earlier, be it in transmission grid and storage, it risks causing problem to the whole system. Vietnam, for example, the market cross is also broad technical issue, a growing overcapacity, overloaded transmission and channel due to the striking difference of the electricity supply demand throughout the day, and then fluctuating power of several complete transmission line, especially on the 500 kV in the North Shore transmission line. A sudden uptake of variable renewables with the storage is not dispatched during the flooding system that maximize the hydropower output can also cause further strain to the grid. Natural disaster also factor aside, in the absence of rigid indicator how much storage is needed and grid capacity to balance intermittency in the energy infrastructure, as Maurice mentioned earlier. So the situation is growing very fast, but it's also very important for the country to set the right context and policy. Thank you, Bri.
Bri, you're on mute.
Thank you for picking that up. And which countries can move faster on energy storage based on existing policy conditions, Benny?
Yeah, thank you again, Bri. That frankly speaking, on the specific policy is the only few at this stage in the ASEAN countries, despite the implementation at the technical level. Vietnam was, of course, definitely a starting point to be talked about with the issue that I mentioned earlier. But we also see that other countries is also escalating the progress. I mean, the Singapore SB group with the trial technology to push the energy from the battery of the electric vehicle back to power grid. And then in the announcement of the budget 2020, the phase out internal combustion is also a policy push for the government to measure to increase the battery storage. Malaysia is also another example when it's projected to increase from the current around 4,400 megawatt to 10,000 megawatt in the next 15 years on the renewable. And then the policy is being put in place, but highlighting on the solar as the highest potential, so that we will push on the policy to support the battery storage. Cambodia is also a new development that we have, where the new master plan to mitigate the carbon print that we launched by the minister last week. Also, a plan to develop utility scale battery storage into the system, and the policy is also being injected to be in place. And Indonesia, of course, with over 80% of the power generated for a Java-Bali grid, which supply the electricity to 70% of the country population, come from fossils. Then a key measure to support Indonesia, the decarbonization agenda in development of the energy storage to enable integration of renewable energy is very much important. And as many of you also hear that very recently, the new battery factory is starting to be constructed, that even though there is also a push for government to put the policy in place so that the country can run faster to deploy the energy storage. I stop here. Thank you, Bri.
Thanks very much, Benny. And Mauricio, what role do you see for battery storage and energy storage more broadly playing in the region?
Thank you, Bri. Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess actually already Benny mentioned a lot of opportunity for storage and battery, particularly in different countries in the region. But now more thinking about beyond what is happening today and what can happen in the medium long term. I think it's first of all important to mention that several studies have already assessed the big potential for deployment of storage in the region. And among these 80 gigawatt of expected deployment of an installed capacity of storage, which is almost half of the total storage installed so far in the world in the next just 10 years, most of this capacity will be installed in the region, in Asia, in Southeast Asia. And the reason for why this could happen, there are several. First of all, as already explained before, the storage and particularly the batteries are providing flexibility to the grid. And there's a natural need of flexibility in several grids in several countries in the area due to the increase of demand. And basically because the demand is increasing, there's a need of installing more power generation. And some of the current fleets, particularly the coal fleets, are not flexible. So therefore, there's a need of installing new thermal generation to provide flexibility. Well, batteries can provide the flexibility instead of this new thermal generation. But also another driver, of course, is the decarbonization. Due to decarbonization, there's an increased penetration of renewable, which increase the need of flexibility to the grid. And for example, we have been working with the Asian Development Bank to understand what are the opportunities for retired coal fleets in those in Vietnam, in Philippines and Indonesia, and assessing what are opportunities for basically financial mechanisms that allow to retire those fleets. And a key point is what will be the flexibility in place in the moment of this, when this fleet is retired. Again, the penetration of storage, and particularly battery, will reinforce the flexibility characteristics of the grid, and therefore will allow a smoother penetration of renewable within the grid. And actually, the current plans of penetration of renewable are already considering some of the storage capacity in place. Then another driver is the digitalization of the grid. When the grids are modernized globally, and particularly in the region, basically there's an opportunity for demand-side flexibility that I was explaining before. So to have storage installed in demand side, in demand user sites, where this storage not only will provide services to the user, but also to the grid. And in this case, for example, is for example, it's highly important to have, as I said before, an adequate regulatory and policy landscape in place, and a type of work that, for example, we have been doing in the region to identify that is in China. We have been working with the Chinese Network Energy Storage Alliance to develop a roadmap for ancillary service market deployment in the country. And finally, another driver as well, as I explained before, is the need of reinforcement of the grid when the demand is increasing. The utilities, instead of considering, the networks operator and owners, instead of just considering the conventional reinforcement of grid, which means installing more transmission lines or more distribution lines and transformer, etc., they can use a non-conventional way of providing this power through storage, such as, for example, batteries. And we have been working in this type of models, understanding how they they have to change the planning and operations process in the UK with several DNOs. And all of that is just when I'm talking about flexibility. But then another opportunity as well for the deployment of batteries in those globally, but also in the countries of the region, of course, is energy access. When you talk here, I'm thinking about integration of, for example, batteries with solar to allow access to electricity in several countries in Africa and South America, but also in Southeast Asia. And then, of course, the last point, and this is one of the biggest drivers decreasing actually the price of the battery, is the use of batteries for electrification of transport, particularly for small and medium-sized vehicles. Actually, all studies forecast that the real possibility to decarbonize the transport for those vehicles, which is the biggest portion of the demand of the road demand transport, is using batteries. So as you can see, there's a lot of potential for battery storage, and different drivers are producing this possibility of deployment of the technologies in the region. Just to finalize, I would like to mention about a type of value that, for example, in the UK, we have assessed that to reach net zero, it will be, of course, highly expensive for the country to reach net zero in the system. But we have assessed a different scenario how this can be reached, and in all this scenario, you can get a saving in the range of 10 to 17 billion pounds per year if you have sufficient flexibility in place, and this flexibility probably will come in 80% from, or more than 80% from batteries, either batteries installed in the grid, providing flexibility and all those services I just mentioned about, or batteries in vehicles connected to the grid, providing services as well. So as you can see, the batteries not only have a big opportunity to be installed with different type of services, creating value for different type of stakeholder, but at the end, it's a savings that is a value that will be shared across the whole system, across the whole value chain. And this example that I mentioned in the UK, we have just did a similar study in another country completely different, such as Colombia, where the saving also will be possible according to the studies in a lower range, because countries such as Colombia has already a big amount of hydro capacity, which is naturally flexible, but still the Colombian system can save more than 1 billion per year if they deploy sufficient demand side flexibility, mainly from batteries.
Sounds great. I'm just going to have to move things along quite quickly. I'm just conscious of how long we've got for the talk, and I'd like to turn to Bert and just find out, as one of the largest energy companies worldwide and very active in Asia, what is it that you're working on in the storage space now?
Hi, thank you, Brie. So we are actually in Singapore. We actually have a test bed out of the shores here in Singapore at Semakau Island, which is actually a landfill island, where we're together with NTU have a microgrid where we have integrated a wind turbine, renewable energy, hydrogen electrolyzer, battery storage, and solar energy. And together with a test bank, we actually try to test how batteries would operate in an industrial environment. So that leads to many of our corporate customers basically willing to look for what is the next innovative energy solutions. They come to us, they approach us, and we can actually test their load in a microgrid environment. So what we're looking at is while not necessarily price competitive today, we're definitely looking to these corporates that are now openly asking themselves the question, how can I create from my factory a microgrid? Everybody basically knows today that you cannot yet take factories or big operations, to say so, offline, but many are now asking what could I do, or how should I do it to bring them offline. So we now see first movers actually coming to market and asking us to implement these solutions. We've just won in Singapore a contract for a big retailer where actually had solar energy. He had excess solar power, and instead of actually injecting into the grid, he now wants to embed it with a battery. While he knows that it's not necessarily cost competitive, some of them really do it out of an innovation element, to basically demonstrate to their customers that they're actually working and testing on the next tier technologies. Another segment which we see picking up is universities. These institutions as well have excess or an abundance of power, abundance of buildings, while not necessarily always the load, in particular during holidays. And we see as well that these customers now start to approach us and ask us as well about battery technologies.
And what's the broader opportunity for investors and companies like NG across the region in the battery space?
No, so clearly the broader opportunity for us, if you would say, first of all, you would go to the countries where typically you would combine solar plus battery. So you automatically think of the countries where there are higher solar radiations. So thinking about the Philippines, Australia. And there we actually see that many of our customers have actually larger rooftop space than load. So it's for these customers in particular that we're bringing forward these solutions. Obviously, from moving away from corporates or energy solutions, there is well a very big potential on the remote islands or let's say construction sites, where they still use diesel gensets actually to power their operations. So it's in that segment that you now see as well that battery storage plus solar energy becomes a viable solution as you actually seek to replace more expensive diesel gensets.
But just sort of closing out that, do you feel like some of the other services we've spoken about batteries' ability to provide are still sort of a way off in terms of policy support across the region?
Well, yes and no to say so. So I think in terms of policy support, you automatically think of subsidies, and in North America we see now certain regions picking up very hard on batteries because of subsidies. That said, we typically see in these parts of the world that even for the adoption of renewable energy, while you have seen adoption of solar power, wind power has been fueled by subsidies. In Asia, we have not seen sometimes very small feed-in tariffs at the start of it, but I don't necessarily think that you need to have these subsidies. We see that there start to become use cases in Australia and the Philippines where solar plus battery can become a parity. We see solar at 50 to sometimes 70, 80% discount to the grid tariff. So that buffer really allows to basically adopt solar. In addition to that, with let's say electromobility picking up, like Mauricio said, Tesla building its gigafactory and many more to follow, we definitely foresee that there is a drop in prices, and on average, we would see that there is a break-even point 5 to 8 years from now, where we truly believe that everybody that will consider solar, with efficiency of solar panels as well to increase, definitely will bundle it with a battery to balance out its production.
Well, thanks very much. And Siobhan, I'd be grateful to have your view on this, particularly given your sort of involvement actually scaling up and making things work.
Yeah, and it's almost like the collection of everything that all the panelists have been saying. There's this shared vision about what does the world actually kind of look like, and that world is actually going to a distributed, decentralized, flexible energy system, and that is the approach that needs to exist into the future, and where batteries have a very clear role to play in that. Our focus as BP Launchpad is about investing and scaling digital companies that have an ability to address net zero. So we have a fundamental thesis that is around, if we can connect software to large industrial assets, we can attempt to change the way that energy is connected and used within the world. And we do that essentially because there is this move away from molecules to electrons, and this is therefore creating the electron economy for us. And therefore, we're investing in scaling in companies into that space. Apologies, I've got a little bit of background of in the office here of going through. On the electrons, to that point, then, one of our most recent investments as BP Launchpad was in open energy. And open energy, effectively, it connects to distributed assets, to batteries, to other things, and helps to optimize those and enable for flexibility into the grid. And we're pretty excited about that investment in our overall thesis because, as we've talked about before, the growth in batteries, the growth in flexibility, as Bert was saying, the recognition that corporates are wanting to move in this direction to say, how do I do some of this differently? And we see open energy as a core part of being able to support that setup into the future.
So I guess in that same vein, and maybe it's a question for you and also for Benny as well, when you talk about electrons and batteries, obviously batteries sort of can store any kind of energy, and if it's a grid-based battery, it can be storing energy that's dispatched from any facility, be, you know, whether it's renewable or sort of fossil fuel. And what play, I don't know, Siobhan, if you've got any sort of thoughts on that as well in terms of how you control that when you are sort of using data and connectivity. And I don't know whether it's obviously sort of important to achieve net zero, but in the mix and where we are now, sort of how important is it to sort of control and know what it is that's being dispatched from these storage facilities?
I think it's highly important. And I think it's even more important whenever we start to look at, there's lots of batteries coming on to the grid today, but when we start to get into recycling of those batteries and into second life, actually really understanding the data and the history behind what has that battery done, from the pack to the module to any of the individual cells, understanding and optimizing those so that we're actually kind of putting safe batteries into the system for going forward. It's just huge for us. Maybe Benny's got some approach there, but it is part of our thesis of what we're investing in is data that tells us about what is happening to a particular asset, that helps us to understand that and puts that decision making in the right places.
That's fantastic. I think we're basically time's up. I haven't seen any questions come through in the Q&A session, but obviously we're now sending everyone into breakout groups with our panelists. So you'll have an opportunity that you have at the end of the 15 minutes. Please keep your video cameras on during this breakout session. It is a networking session, an opportunity to get to know everyone and share our views on this topic. And we'll be coming back in 15 minutes with a bit of a wrap up from our panelists and to close the session. So hope to see you back in 15 minutes and enjoy the next part of this today's event. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the full group. Over the next few minutes, I'd like to sort of pass the baton around to each of our panelists, and if they could just, give us a brief summary of the discussion in their group. Might hand over to you, Benny, first. I don't know if you want to go first off the ranks there.
Right. Thank you, Bri. I mean, it's gonna be. I have a privilege to sit down with two experts on the finance group. So we were talking about fiscal incentives and how the situation in the region, and also look at example Australia, as Leon mentioned, is a good example. And then we see that we see a battery will, it's very critical, and then will have a central place in the futures markets. And the government stimulus package, it's prominent, but it's also to figure out what's the thing that needs to be done. And also very interesting from Leon as well mentioned that when we discussed it, what kind of incentive that we need to provide on the deployment of energy storage. If I correctly guess that it can be packaged. It's a part of the existing incentive of renewable energy. So in the PPA, so it just simply run that way rather than provided a separate one. So it helps addressing the issue on the giving the stimulus or fiscal incentive for the storage development in the region. I hope I get that correctly. Bri, have anything else to be added? It was a very lovely discussion on this kind of financing issue.
Yeah, no, it was a really good discussion that we had, and that whole example around where it is a hybrid model. So you've got your battery with your renewable installation. If the battery is actually dispatching the power, that the off-taker should be paying for that power, and if there are feed-in tariffs, paying at that rate. Whether or not that would work to make it commercial and viable as a project. Just handing on, Bert, perhaps if you could wrap up your room's discussion.
Yes, no, I had a very interesting discussion with Robert, who actually works for McDonald's. Always need to see that I say it right. But I think he confirmed the trend as well. So he sees a tremendous pickup of studies for batteries, and in particular, as we discussed, the island grids, the Philippines, as well as Australia. You see a tremendous demand for energy picking up, or for battery storage picking up. And one final element to basically conclude on is and we didn't touch upon as NG does it as a developer as well. So while many of the studies are still looking to self-invest, NG is more than happy to invest in these solutions. So we definitely believe that while many have been looking at it from an investment perspective, and it's not necessarily the right thing, but if you actually put it into a service model with an external investor such as NG, you basically look to break even, and the technology is really there at parity, and only expected to decrease in time.
Thanks very much, Bert. And handing over to Mauricio.
Thank you, Bri. Well, in my breakout session, we talked mainly about opportunities for batteries in transport. Actually, we had a startup interested in using batteries for electric vehicles, and also electrified bus fleet operator in Singapore. And well, basically, I would say we discussed about what are the key challenges for using battery in transport, particularly in the case of the bus fleet. First of all, about the grid capacity. In their case, they have the maximum grid capacity. They have reached the maximum grid capacity, and therefore they cannot electrify more buses in the site when they're charging, and in that case, for example, we talk about opportunity to integrate this with on-site generation and batteries to provide additional capacity without the need of reinforcing the grid. And such business model like that and case study like that, as a Carbon Trust, actually we have identified and supported in Wales in the UK. And also we talk about V2G and what are the opportunity for a fleet to provide V2G in Singapore. Well, first of all, of course, there's the possibility, the market possibility and the policies to allow that. But also there's another interesting challenge in that was raised in terms of what will be the impact in the lifetime of the battery of the vehicles, and also in the utilization of the vehicles, because usually the fleet operator, as it was the case here, the main interest is to have the bus as much as possible on the road instead of being standard in a park site providing energy to the grid. So it was an interesting conversation to understand what are the actual possibilities for batteries in transport.
Thanks very much. And to finish, Siobhan?
Yeah, we had a really great kind of panel discussion. We covered a couple of things. So the first one was about the ability to move towards anything on net zero requires kind of policy, market, and technology. So those three pillars in order to be able to help us to move there. Some reflections that this was an incredible conversation because from a market standpoint, Benny gave us some really interesting insights across the region about the different types of energy systems and renewable capacity that has been added in. There was some reflection that from Mauricio, you know, the ability to kind of technology could be a bottleneck or a breakthrough. So as we're adding kind of this battery technologies in that introduction, there is challenges ahead of us, but we're at that point, even different challenges from where we are now to what those will be 3 years from now. So it will be this constantly moving approach for us. And what was really interesting is one of the areas in the breakout room was connected to bringing digital and OE as this platform, as this connection to be able to help to optimize those assets and that connection into the grid and seeing this movement in that area. And finally, there was this wrap up around the ecosystem and the ability to kind of reflecting on what Bert was saying, a reflection of the ability to bring the ecosystem together, even at a small scale in a microgrid, and encouraging those consumers, even large industrial consumers and corporates, to take that up will start to move us in a different direction towards net zero. So some really great learnings. And even for me, to Benny, to Bert, to Mauricio, to Brie, I've learned more in the last hour, I think, than what I've done in maybe 6 months in kind of spending time in this. So it's been really great. And that was reflected from the rest of the breakout room.
Oh, thanks very much, Siobhan. And thank you very much to all our panellists. I think it's been a great, very informative session today. And obviously there are exciting things ahead for the use of storage and battery storage in Asia. So just to thank you all also for joining us today. In terms of other events that we have coming up, we have got the BritCham Business Awards coming up, so please register for any of these events if you are interested in any of the topics. And obviously we've got a session coming up with the Ministry of Manpower, speaking with the Minister themselves. We've got a session on green data centres coming up, closing the gender attrition gap. We've got a session on diversity and inclusion. Ending the year, really, we've got a SEW think tank, and that's where we're going to be reflecting on this and other decarbonise events that we have been focusing on throughout this year. We've obviously got the Climate Chamber mission hosted by the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce as well on the 2nd and 3rd of November. So just a really big thank you for joining, and please sign up for any of those future events that might be of interest. Pleasure to spend this session with you today. Thank you very much.